Today we're going to be talking about a thing, all for Auth, Auth for all, bringing end-user identity to the service mesh. Quite a mouthful, but hey, we'll get started here. A couple things on the agenda. First of all, we want to talk about how Auth works today, how you may do it at your company, how it was done maybe a year, how it's done today, what some of the pains are. We're going to talk about what the future kind of looks like with Istio. We have a small demo for you all, and talk about a little bit what's next and what the service mesh brings. Envoys are cool. So that being said, my name is Cameron. I'm a software engineer at Pivotal, specifically on the application single sign-on team.
And my name's Tian Wang. I'm the senior product manager over the application identity problem space. So we're both from Pivotal, and this is a talk about a collaboration that we're doing with Thales eSecurity, so Nick Smith and some folks out of London, as well as the Istio Security Working Group, so Li Ming, Wang, Tao Li, and a bunch of those folks there. And just yesterday we were at the Istio workshop when Zach Butcher mentioned, wouldn't it be great if someone took OAuth OIDC libraries and put them in the sidecar? So, hint, hint.
All right, so let's start with a story. It's going to be called Today's Gruesome World of Auth. Boo. Hi, meet the app developer. He makes apps. Meet the decision maker. She makes decisions. And with those decisions come business opportunity. She wants to grow her business. There's several things you can do, and software is one great way to grow your business, make money. So she has some requirements, an application that needs to be built. She reaches out to the app developer. He understands. He's pretty excited. This is more business logic he gets to write, right? Well, he gets down, makes his list, starts drafting some stuff up, works on some features, and then he realizes, oh, hey, this story includes, I need to bring some auth to my app as well. How do I do that? So, first thing, right, just like any normal developer, you hit the books, aka Google and Stack Overflow, and you learn how to do auth. Like, what does that even mean, right? I just build apps. Well, you start looking around and you notice there's a lot of resources here. There's this thing called OpenID Connect. There's this thing called SAML. There's JOTS. What is this ID token thing everyone's talking about? And really, none of this is language agnostic. I chose to use Spring in this case, so now I have to find something that meets my needs where it's already written in Java. Maybe there's a framework that already exists. It's very easy to get overwhelmed in this kind of a world. And the app may have been delivered, but it took a lot of time. There's some risk to be made, and not everyone's happy. But the problem is, this is just a single app developer.
And enterprises are going to have hundreds of application developers that are all trying to kind of figure this out and build applications and deliver business value. And there's this really good talk, I forget where it was or who it was, but the concept was, said no CEO ever. So all my developers know how to build LDAP, SAML, and OIDC, and that's great, said no CEO ever. So going from this, of course, we got hundreds of enterprise application developers that are trying to build thousands of applications and microservices. And the question there is, of course, how am I building identity across all of those? Leaving aside that there's probably a single identity provider team. What's that? Leaving aside the fact that there's like a single identity provider team, that's going to be a bottleneck to kind of building identity into those applications. There's also the questions of how am I going to build this into my applications? What are application developers doing? What libraries are they choosing to use? What policies are they enforcing? What models are they trying to use? Is it even patch secure? So when we get into the security aspects, of course, what happens when a CV happens? Where am I vulnerable? What am I going to do? How am I going to roll this out? You're still trying to grow your applications, and if you're not able to keep up, of course, this is going to be a very chaotic, a very messy, meshy mess all over the place. So we just went over a lot of the challenges that you might see related to kind of identity at scale at various corporations. And this is basically something that is near and dear to our heart. So one of our central personas is the enterprise application developer. And we are very much focused on their user journey as a part of my product, the Pivotal Single Sign-On service. But the way we look at it is this user journey is very user-centric and solution agnostic and full of pains that exist across all enterprises.
But hey, we're here to tell you the future is a pretty nice place. So let's talk about sidecars. Oh, not these kind of sidecars. These kind of sidecars, where traffic goes in. When your app receives a request, it hits a proxy first. When your app wants to make an outside or an egress call, it hits the proxy first. And you can kind of think about this as the smallest unit, and whether you're using Kubernetes or whatever, like a little pod, right? The cool part here is when I start scaling my app, my proxies are going to scale with it. So that's great. But one of the main pieces to really acknowledge here is that we're taking a lot of the logic that's inside of your app and we're doing it elsewhere. So let's look at your app. It probably does some really cool thing and you're probably really proud of it and you should be, but there's a lot of business logic and that's really important. But to make your app do the thing it was supposed to do, you added things like metrics and tracing, logging, service discovery, authentication, right? So you probably picked some framework, maybe you worked on it from scratch, but in an Istio Envoy world, here's your app. You bring off your app, it has its own special container, just your business logic. You don't have to worry about anything else, and we split that up. So it's all done kind of for you almost. And the best part is it's language agnostic. I don't have to pick a specific framework, write it myself just because I'm using some weird language, and it kind of does the same thing, right?
So that's kind of like the whole, what if my application didn't support it before, what we could add it there, whether it's greenfield, brownfield. And then, of course, when you kind of wire all those up together and you have application sidecars at every level, then you get this entire service mesh. And with the service mesh, of course, we also have the ingress gateway or kind of that edge component that can handle inbound and outbound traffic to this mesh as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about this as well, because essentially we're kind of seeing this as almost like a sidecar for the mesh itself, and a place where we can add a lot of our own logic as well.
So, we talked a lot about the data plane here, the proxy, the envoy, the thing that's going to enact on the policies that we give it. But in our example and a few demos about today, we're going to be using Istio. I'm sure you're familiar with it by now, so I won't go too deep into it. But the whole idea is this is going to manage all of our policies for us. This is our control plane that we've chosen to use. So the real piece here is we're trying to take all of this little logic that we rewrite every single time, super boilerplate, and we could push it to the sidecar or to the platform or to Istio. Eric's talk today mentioned a huge key concept of Istio is, I don't have to keep doing things as an app developer. They're kind of done for me. I'm able to split off this logic. So what does a world look like where we do this with Auth? And we're here to kind of show you a little bit. So we're going to go throughout this story piece again. So a user wants to hit your app. Maybe they go to something like /dashboard, maybe whatever. Maybe they do or don't have a token. We'll find out in a second. But the first thing, it's going to go through your ingress gateway. So it travels through, and we notice that there's no token or cookie associated. So it hits that proxy. Proxy thinks about it to a second and says, hey, I see you don't have a token, but you match a particular IDP that I already have set up. Maybe it's an internal IDP, maybe it's consumer-facing, who knows, but you have a login endpoint to hit. So you're redirected there in order to kick off the whole OAuth flow.
And from there as well, you might be thinking, well, maybe I don't have something that uses OIDC or OAuth. It's very common to kind of have LDAP or SAML behind. And that's where we kind of use that same tagline as Kubernetes does, which is, well, identity proxies can help solve that for you. And the idea there is, of course, this identity proxy can act as an authorization server for the policy that you set on this proxy. And it can help then translate your LDAP and SAML connections back into this login page of your own. And this is something we use ourselves with Cloud Foundry's user account and authentication service. It is just one example of an identity proxy. There's plenty out there, so you can just bring your own.
So next step in the OAuth flow is you get a code. Maybe it came back and went to the identity proxy, but you get a code, and the proxy actually exchanges this for a token. And it can be an ID token, JOT token, however you have it set up. But the whole idea is now whenever I enter the mesh, if I don't have a token, that whole flow takes place. I have a token, and then you're passed down in the request with the correct bearer token or ID token attached. But if I do have a token or cookie attached, it automatically knows you're not going to have to go through that OAuth flow again. It's translated into a bearer token and propped down to your app. And now I'm sure like all of you as well, you've probably read the documentation of Istio and you're like, wait a second, I've never seen this policy. Well, this is a little experimental policy that Pivotal and Talis is working on. We have some more information kind of at the end.
And then, of course, just to give a brief intro to Jot, but I think most people here might have heard of this before from past talks. Jots have a typical header, a body, and a signature. And then the signature itself offers, tamper-proof. It's meant to kind of prevent the token from being tampered. And then, of course, the body contains a bunch of information about the user that is both per OIDC spec, but a lot of people also go and add custom claims to that Jot token.
So we went past the gateway, and now I'm on to some downstream services. So you are here. Let's talk about the first important policy, Jot auth in, or auth in, Jot validation. In this case, we want to know who the user is, and we don't really care about what they can do. We just want to make sure that they have a token. Is this token signed by the correct person via some JWKS URI? Is it given by the correct issuer? Is it expired? Things like this, right? So my first request hits, I have an appropriate token. Proxy thinks about it, says, hey, here you go, talk to the app. The next request, a user logs in, or a user has a bad token or no token at all, and the proxy is able to kill that request before it hits the app. Next popular one you've probably heard of, Auth. This comes in the form of service roles and service roles bindings. So this is that part that I mentioned, can the user do what they think they can do? So if I'm trying to make a post request or /todos endpoint here, I have the scope read and write. And I have a service role set up that says it will only be granted to you or bound to you if you have this write scope. In this case, I do. I'm able to pass on that super secret message to my app. But in this case, a to-dos viewer with only the read scope is rejected at the proxy. And so here I am, right? I've gone to the first downstream service, but what about the rest of them, right? We're a service mesh. We have microservices. Well, the best part is, as the request kind of keeps going downstream, you can keep reapplying these policies over and over until finally, maybe one rejects the request and you get whatever error code you have set up, or you can just keep reapplying the auth and auth z rules.
And our focus here has really been talking about the end user authentication piece that passes along with the request through your microservices. But that doesn't mean we aren't thinking about the application identity, those service-to-service pieces as well. But the good thing is there's a bunch of smart people in the Istio community who are working to tackle that exact same problem. So we believe that a lot of this can be leveraged complementary with the end user authentication. And you can basically get all that spiffy goodness that you want.
All right, so we have a live demo for you all because we like to live life on the edge. If you haven't seen book info, that was in the previous few talks as well, but we're using book info from Istio to do this. Let's see here. I'll make this a little bit bigger because the screen's a lot bigger. So I have book info. I actually have one policy already set up today. Let me actually make this a bit bigger so you can see. But if I do something like, let's look what I have here. So I have some policies set up. The first one that I've already enabled is, The first one I've already enabled is my service role and service role binding. So I have RBAC configured, but this says, hey, if you're coming from a certain service, allow anyone basically to view the product viewer page. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, in order to view this, you have to have a valid token. So to do that, I'm going to kapply. I'm going to apply this policy, but let's take a look at what it does first. Basically, anytime, we're applying this to all sidecars in this case, but we're saying, hey, you need to have a Jot token. It needs to be an issuer from our source and a JWKS URI from our source. So now if I visit this page without any kind of form of token, I get an origin authentication failed. And you're probably thinking, hey, how did you get that token the first time in that slide you were talking about? So we have a thing for that. Let me apply that. So this is our OIDC filter policy. I'll show it to you. There's going to be some secrets, but it's fine because those are going to be deleted after this talk. But regardless, another thing I mentioned that this is kind of experimental right now. So the policy has actually changed a bit. Let me actually make it bigger for you. But you can see I have a multiple set of IDPs here. Given a certain request, I can match that IDP. I have some values set up like my authorization token, JWKS URI endpoint, things like that, right? But let's see what this actually looks like. So I'm going to hit my page, And instead of an issue, I am automatically redirected to my chosen IDP. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and sign in with Google. And I'm logged in here, and hey, what do you know? I now have access to the app. One thing to show as well is, okay, get pods. If you're familiar with the OAuth flow, you know that it isn't stateless, and I actually have several ingress gateways here, so obviously an issue to be solved there. We can talk about a little bit later, but here's the next thing I want to do. I want to say you need a pivotal.io address in order to view this product page. Maybe it's an internal tool, so let's apply that. So if I look at that policy, all it's saying is, hey, just like before the service role binding, only grant this service role is if I have a pivotal.io email address. So that means when I refresh this page here, I'm not just going to kill it because caching is a thing, right? Let's see. I'm going to log back in with Google. And what do you know? Access denied. But if I were to log in with my pivotal email address, sure, you can have an ID token. Bam, I'm in.
So that was just kind of an example of where we are today, and this is something we're working towards upstreaming into Envoy as well as contributing into Istio itself. So we've actually presented the OIDC policy, I think 2 weeks back as a part of the Istio security working group. So it's there in the notes, and we'll have it at the end of these slides as well. Now, of course, there's a lot of things that can be added by the time this goes, production enterprise ready. Of course, things like observability, of which there's a lot of activity going on there within the Istio community as well, so not something we're going to worry too much about. Default security policies, this is always that, DevOps, dev or sec or ops kind of conversation, who owns the policies. So a lot of that comes around, are there default policies you want to set, who can set what policies where. There's kind of this whole concept of RC tokens that Google folks have been talking about in the Istio security working group, and the concept of there is their request context tokens. So one disadvantage or risk of using an OIDC token throughout your mesh, of course, is can it be used for impersonating? Can like a service take it and call another service with it? So request context tokens are meant to kind of swap those out beyond the edge and use kind of this token only in the context of container to containers. And that, of course, means we can kind of just worry about token exchanges then at the edge of this service mesh. So like if we're receiving tokens from another authorization server or sending tokens out that need to be authenticated by a different authorization server, maybe that's only the time we really have to worry about token exchange scenarios. There's a lot of additional items as well that could be essentially chained with fine-grained authorization. With scopes in OIDC, they're fairly limited towards kind of role-based access control scenarios. So there's definitely going to have to be kind of what happens for more fine-grained authorizations. And then, of course, other new innovations that can happen in the service mesh space. This next-generation access control, token blacklisting, a bunch of different things that may not have been possible before, are now going to be possible with a service mesh. And the best part is, since all of this logic sits outside your code base, why not just change policies later, make sure your use cases work? So what's an ideal future look like? And this is just painting a rosy picture. We're already putting this logic into sidecars. So you're going to have essentially this logic available kind of across your service mesh. We've already chosen to start using federation as a protocol with OIDC. So you have federation at the end user level, and it's really cool to see kind of Spiffy going in the direction of federation as well. So one joke we have with our team is that software development is pretty cyclical. So at some point, we're going to start calling the service mesh a monolith and move to microservice meshes. And then, of course, you're going to get observability, which is something we've talked about. Very important to have auditing, logging, monitoring, all of that across your service mesh. And then, of course, the operational aspects of this as well, upgrading, patching, being able to kind of use policies to kind of help you manage this all across everywhere. But really what we see, the outcomes that are being enabled by this, is that you'll be able to have security and velocity while focusing on just the business value.
So in our strange planet, this changes things a bit, right? There's a lot less things we have to do. There's a lot more features we get for free. And I mean, I can go off and name the benefits, or you can just kind of read the slide. But our developers are happier. Our platform and security operators' lives are much easier. The business side can focus on velocity. Everything Tian just said, it's all nice and great. More focus, less risks. It's pretty good.
And this is something that we've been talking to our customers about across the Fortune 500, minus the tech companies, of course. So looking really at enterprise developers everywhere and kind of like seeing this is kind of a pain that they're seeing and trying to give them kind of a solution. So asking them questions about like what are the requirements for this, but trying to kind of say like hold off, it's not quite there yet. We're trying to learn from you right now. And this is something, of course, that kind of fits with Pivotal's value of transforming the way the world builds software. We're really looking at kind of the people, process, and culture side of things on top of the tools that enable enterprises to be successful. And a lot of that has to do then with making sure, like from our side, that we have the tools to help enterprises build identity into their software. So, we want to definitely work with the open source community more. We definitely would love collaborators in the identity space and for security aspects of Istio and the service mesh. So we have a Slack channel OIDC proposal out there. There's the Istio Discuss Security channel, which I may go to every few months or so. And then the Google shortener wasn't working, so remember our OIDC proposal link.
They actually deprecated it in like a couple of months ago.
Oh no, we didn't know that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're a small team at Pivotal, 4 developers, 2 designers, and a PM, working with like 2 developers out of London and the Istio Security Working Group. So, hoping to get more involved in the community.
Also follow us on Twitter.
I don't really use it, but I put mine there anyways.
Any questions, by the way?
Your enhancement to Envoy itself is the additional policy for the OAuth config of your auth endpoint, your token endpoint, et cetera. Is that correct?
So I can kind of take this question. The question was, I believe our OIDC policy was a policy inside of Envoy. So we have built a filter, or Talas has built a filter, and we've kind of helped out a bit. And it's the OIDC filter as well as the session manager filter. And the idea is OIDC is pretty extensible, so I could also have an OAuth filter as well built on that session manager. So we're in the process of upstreaming those changes into Envoy, so you could use whatever service mesh you'd like. In our case, we're specifically working with Istio, and we're creating an OIDC policy, where as similar to the policy you saw today, I could apply it, those configs go to Envoy, and the magic happens.
And we're actually meeting with our collaborators on Google Campus in 2 weeks' time, just to kind of talk through how we can get the rest of the way to get this into the open source community.
So the second question related, so the callback handler is part of that proxy that policy is causing to be spun up, not the Envoy proxy, but the OIDC proxy. We had to go down a very similar road, and one of the challenges with an SPA client is it's absolutely critical that you not bleed those tokens through client side, which meant that proxy also had the additional responsibility of storing those, but maintaining their correlation to which user a given token was for, and in a non-spoofable way. Have you tackled that?
Yes, this is a problem that we're currently solving. And as I mentioned, another problem very similar is the whole fact if you have multiple ingress gateways, it's not guaranteed that you're going to go to the same gateway. OAuth is not a stateful operation. So there's kind of 2 approaches here. The first approach that we've necessarily taken is we have an encrypted cookie. The token does not actually bleed into, we're storing the cookie, the encrypted cookie, into the browser. The browser can't read it, can't encrypt it. This is kind of like a K8 secret to unencrypt inside of the service mesh. Once the proxy receives that encrypted cookie, it's able to unencrypt and pass down. The second option, like you mentioned, is you need some kind of persistent storage. So we're also working on, currently in this Envoy filter, you can swap out between in-memory using the encryption key, or you can bring your own Redis. And this is kind of an area that we're looking into. Very similar, it's a possibility to add Redis to the mixer rate limiting filter. This is just another problem kind of have to solve. But all stuff like that is definitely what's going on in that Slack channel. So. Oh, hey. Yeah, good question. So the question here was, does the OIDC filter only work with JOT tokens? And right now, that's kind of the case. It just kind of built that way. It could be extended to have any form of opaque token. It's just the main reason we started with JOTs is so that we can build the Auth-in and Auth-z filter right on top of it. Because the Auth-in, Auth-z, right, you need a JOT to validate claims.
I think there's been some talks in the community. Actually, a proposal came out, I believe, 3 weeks back or so to look at opaque tokens as well. I think the reason why we went with JOT was, of course, for offline validation and the existing policy filters, just to avoid the network hops. And with kind of the service mesh, we're hoping that a lot of this is more hidden away from the user, especially if you layer MTLS on top. It's not like out of the picture to use OAuth with opaque tokens, but it is going to have to go back to the central authorization server for that validation, and you're going to have to start like reintroducing those network hops.
Well, hey, if that's everything, that's all we had to say, and thanks for listening.